Hello, everyone. Uh, Today I'm going to talk about the war, ongoing war between Ukraine and Russia. Now, obviously, Russia doesn't call this a war, they call it a military operation to demilitarize Ukraine. And obviously, Ukraine calls it a war, rather, an invasion. So, between these, obviously, whenever a huge event like this occurs, the war is not just about you know bombs and missiles dropping on populated areas. It has also to do with what you see and what you hear on your mobile phones, what you read in the newspapers, what you see on the TV. Information warfare or propaganda about the war is also a part of the war. So that event which is currently taking place in Ukraine, we as viewers are also a party to it. And our acts of condemning it or supporting it also add in to this war. Because how other nations will react to this war would also in turn reflect what the people of those countries think about these wars. So propaganda becomes a very important tool in warfare. And what I am observing is that the majority or the most dominant discourse about this war is coming, and it is sourced from the Anglo-American media channels. These Anglo-American media channels, like the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, then we have the BBC, and even the Guardian, etc. The list is long. These media channels, along with their subsidiaries in other Asian nations, the picture that they are drawing of this event goes on like this, something on these lines. One, Putin is a dictator, and he has taken this decision because he wants to win the election, or he is just threatened by democracies in his neighborhood, and it is his choice alone. He suddenly just wants to go on a war because he lives in the 1960s and he dreams of the great Soviet Union. And therefore, out of the blue, despite being ruling Russia for the last 20 or so years, but now suddenly he wants to reconstruct the Soviet Union and wants to wipe out Ukraine from the map of the world. This is the discourse which is coming from there. Add on to this another discourse, the discourse between democracy versus dictatorship. Zelensky's Ukraine is as if the paradise of democracy, and Russia is the dictatorial autocracy which is uncomfortable with this small country, uh, you know, slowly ushering itself into the European Union, NATO, and liberalism and democracy, and joining the free world, the first world, and coming out of the clutches of the second world, that is Russia and its allies. And Russia is uncomfortable about it. Therefore, they have, uh, you know, conducted a preemptive strike to rob Ukrainians of their right to self determination and sovereignty. Well, a part of it is true. But however, this beautiful narrative lacks a vital element of introspection. Introspection that why America failed to stop this war. Why America failed to stop this war. Why despite this war happening currently, America has just announced, you know, economic sanctions and all kinds of good talk, and have actually done nothing on ground to safeguard the Ukrainians from this invasion. Maybe it is possible that America is party to this war and they have uh, legitimate interests and rather advantages that they will accrue with this war. And I'll point out how. First of all, we should understand that Ukraine was a part of the Soviet Union, the erstwhile Soviet Union. When it disintegrated, all the member states like Russian SSR, Ukrainian SSR, socialist republics, Soviet Socialist, the full name of Ukraine was Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, Russian Soviet Socialist Republic, Tajik Soviet Socialist Republics. All of them became independent nations. But they all belonged to one union. And that union was also in a form of a military, it was a military alliance of socialist states against the United States of America. These states were under the Warsaw Pact. The American allies called themselves a military alliance by the name of NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. These two alliance systems were the ones who were party to the 40-50 years long Cold War. After the 1990s, since the Soviet Union disintegrated, there was no second superpower in the world. Strangely, from a bipolar world, we quickly became a unipolar world. First, there were two great superpowers in the world, and suddenly, after the disintegration of the Soviet Union, there was no nation comparable economically, militarily, which could counter the United States of America. Although Russia had all the weapons of the Soviet Union, but its economy had crashed, and they actually scrapped many warships, many of their military installations. They left many of their military bases. Russia didn't have the money to, run that huge military industrial complex that the Soviet Union left with them. So there was no second world power. There was only one superpower in the world. It was the United States of America after 1991. So if you do not have an enemy, why would you continue to operate an anti-Soviet military alliance without Soviet Union being in existence? Why would NATO continue to exist after the dissolution of the Soviet Union? This is the interesting question. The answer, however, comes not through, if we look into the strategic reasons, there is no strategic explanation to it. However, there is an economic explanation to it and a geopolitical explanation to it. NATO, United States of America, since World War II, had entrenched itself in the politics of the European Union and Western European states to such a level that it micromanaged everything in Europe. Any economic decision, any decisions regarding trade or even military-wise, they were, at least observed closely, and at times America intervened in these decisions. When the West Germany was devastated after the World War II, France was crippling, UK was in debt. Through the Marshall Plan, America reinvigorated the European market. And what was the cost of that support Europe took from America? They became a political dependency. They were dependent totally, politically and economically and militarily on the United States of America. However, by 1980s and 90s, when the Soviet Union weaned down and disintegrated, Europe had emerged as a vastly developed, uh, as an economic zone with total GDP production exceeding that of the United States of America. So that if one could argue, if all the European countries came together, they together were more powerful, economically at least, if not militarily, than the United States of America. And America didn't like that. America always want to be on the decision making table in Europe. There's a saying, it goes that United States of America wants to keep Germany down in Europe, Russia out in Europe, and America in. And how to do that? The biggest tool in their hand was to demonize Russia and make Europe realize that they are under a permanent threat from Russia, and therefore to safeguard them, they need the help of the United States of America. This is the rationale which United States of America has always used to keep itself relevant in European politics. So the question is, hey UK, hey Germany, hey France, if you are threatened from Russia, you can't do it on your own. And there are so many different countries here. They won't unite in a go. Who will protect you? I will protect you, the United States of America. So therefore, NATO continued to be, despite a weaker Russia and the dissolution of the Soviet Union, which was the raison d'etre behind NATO, despite them being inexistent as a military threat in the 90s and early 2000s, NATO continued to function. However, we will see during Trump's regime, something changed. The biggest complaint, a valid complaint Trump made was that, see, in NATO, all the countries are supposed to foot the bill to keep that united military operating. And Trump observed that America was paying more than Germany should and France should. So as if he was claiming that all of these European countries are free riders. We are providing them the military support. They are not putting in the money for that. So as if he was giving signals that NATO is redundant, Russia is not a threat, and I will disband NATO, or you foot the bill for it, or you manage your own security. And Pentagon, may I tell you, the deep state in the United States of America didn't like that, because disbanding NATO would deprive this huge American military industrial complex, a huge market for American, weaponry. For example, the F-35 deal, UK is buying it, Germany is buying it, many European countries are buying it, Japan is buying it, and there are so many different types of armaments that these NATO countries buy from the United States of America. And obviously, it forces them to. Even you'd remember Turkey was sanctioned recently because they dared to buy a Russian surface-to-air missile system, S-400, from Russia, because America said, you being a NATO member, Turkey, cannot do so. You have to buy only and only American weapons or make your own. So this is how the American deep state functions. Disbanding NATO would deprive them of the greatest source of income for that military industrial complex. So when Biden came to power and Trump was ousted, almost ousted, we see that this hate towards Russia and this confrontational attitudes toward Russia spiked suddenly when Biden came into office. So when Biden came into office, as far as I observe, what we see is that Biden took extra measure to unite NATO countries again. He tried his best to re-establish the importance of NATO for the European Union. And we must understand that United States of America does not want to lose its relevance in Europe. It does not want Russia to integrate economically in Europe. And how to do it? How to convince all European nations that Russia is your enemy? By actually inviting them into a war. And how to do it? How can America incite Russia into running into a war? Answer is simple. Enter into their backyard and do the thing which makes them the most uncomfortable. And they did it. Biden, when he came into office, suddenly they started giving the signal. Even this new guy in Ukraine, Zelensky, President Zelensky, he was giving signal that Ukraine will join the European Union and they will join, by in extension, NATO. And this was absolutely unacceptable to Russia. Why? Because a Ukraine which is a part of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization brings the NATO ballistic missile system, SAMs and cruise missile systems just 400 to 500 kilometers away from major Russian cities. It actually brings NATO to the threshold of Russia. And also, it violates the Minsk Agreement and many other agreements that the Soviet Union in its last years and the first president of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, had with the regime of Ronald Reagan in US. They came to an agreement. In some agreements, it is explicitly stated. In some agreements, it is implicit that United States of America will not expand NATO into the countries of the erstwhile Soviet Union, that is Latvia, Estonia, Belarus, Ukraine, and the Central Asian republics. But what we see, Latvia, Estonia already joined NATO and EU. Belarus is still very much entrenched into the Russian political union. But Ukraine had been dilly-dallying, with some regimes being pro-Russian, with some regimes being pro-European and American. And what we see is that, so when Biden came into office, he unilaterally welcomed Ukraine with open arms. NATO chief and many leaders of Germany and France, they are giving they gave open statements that Ukraine is a sovereign state and they have freedom to join whatever alliance they want to. And Zelensky, being a CIA puppet, he wants to join NATO. What Russia, on the other hand, felt it was violating the red line. See, every country has a minimum red line beyond which it would not take things lightly. And Ukraine ceding to EU and NATO was unacceptable. So, and you will notice in the statements made by Vladimir Putin in the last 6 months, he was warning again and again that Ukraine must not join NATO. Ukraine must not join NATO. And then we see that gradually the whole Russian military forces gradually they started their whole armaments and their whole military, they started moving towards the western border of Russia or the eastern borders of Ukraine. So, and it was observable. All military satellites, even your Google Maps could show you how this military buildup was happening. So Russia was openly showing it to the world that if Ukraine does something like this, or does not assure the Russian Federation that they will not join NATO, if they will not assure it, we will conduct a preemptive strike. And that is what happened on February 25th. And this was the minimum and single demand Russia had, that America and the European Union must assure Russia that Ukraine will not be included in NATO. But this didn't happen. Again and again, President Biden of US and many leaders of the European Union, they continued to say that Ukraine is free to join, Ukraine is free to join NATO, Ukraine is free to join NATO. And bang, this happened. Other than this, you will read the statement which the president of Russia gave, I think, the night of February 24th or the morning of February 25th. I don't remember exactly. He termed the Ukrainian regime as Nazi. Why would Putin call them Nazi? Because there is an element to truth in it. The current regime of Zelensky and the one preceding him, these regimes are actually moving Ukraine towards the path which I think Sri Lanka took after its independence from Britain. Sri Lanka persecuted the Tamil minorities and made Sri Lanka only for Lankans and Sinhalese speakers. Similarly, what we see in Ukraine became a country of just Ukrainians. The huge minority of Russians living in eastern Ukraine, they were deprived basic rights. Many of them were persecuted, especially those living in Lugansk and Donetsk. And after the secession of Crimea from Ukraine, they began a military operation against these Russian minorities. So I think that also added to Russia's worry about this whole government, and therefore it gradually became inevitable.